As Harvey said, my name is David Cobb. I like to consider myself a proud, a patriotic, and these days, a pissed off American citizen. Oh, good. Good. I'm glad to get that kind of response because, see, I'll also self-identify as a political progressive. And as a political progressive, I think we've made a mistake by allowing the Tea Party to claim a monopoly on political anger.
Coffee party.
Because if you actually talk to a Tea Party supporter and talk to them as one human being to another, which I've done multiple times, what you'll find 9 times out of 10 are those folks are angry about the fact that Wall Street America and the big bankers destroyed the economy and then got $1 trillion reward for their troubles. Well, you know what? I'm angry about that too, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I don't want the Tea Party to be the only place where that legitimate anger is being expressed. But I'll also go deeper, my friends, because I'm also angry that 1 in 6 American families are living below the poverty level. I'm also angry that approximately 20% of the children in the United States of America go to bed hungry or undernourished in the richest country the world has ever seen. I'm also angry about the fact that these huge transnational corporations are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself and creating a racist, sexist, and class-oppressive world order with the plunder and rape of Mother Earth. And may I say that the anger that I'm sharing with you, the anger that so many of you clearly share with me, the anger that so many Americans across party lines and across ideologies share with us, this anger that I'm describing, friends, that's a righteous anger. And I use that word very carefully. It is a righteous anger because you see the word, look, I am the grandson of a Baptist preacher. I know what the word righteous means. And to be clear, righteous anger is unique. See, if you get mad because you didn't get your way, that's not righteous. Righteous anger can only be provoked by anger at injustice, oppression, unfairness. But I'll go even deeper. Righteous anger is not enough to just get mad. You got to get active. Saying it that way, I hope you can see that it was righteous anger that provoked the abolitionist movement in this country. They were angry at a depraved institution and they did something about it. It was righteous anger that brought those women together in Seneca Falls, New York. They were angry at a patriarchal system that was systematically oppressing them in every way, and they acted collectively together. They did something about it. It was righteous anger that fueled the civil rights movement in this country. Righteous anger is a good thing. And even deeper, what's amazing about truly righteous anger is that when you allow the anger to well up in you in an authentic way with emotional and spiritual integrity, and then you allow it to provoke you into action for justice, you will discover joy. You will literally transform that anger. Emotional state will actually transform within you and in with your actions because you will come into contact with other people who are working for justice, other people who are working for peace, other people who are working to protect Mother Earth, and it becomes a joyous experience. I don't know any other thing quite like righteous anger when you let it actually put you into peaceful action. It's a beautiful thing, y'all. Right? Y'all know what I'm talking about. It is. It's a beautiful thing. So righteous anger, let's get in touch with the fact that we really are angry about this system that is systematically exploiting and oppressing the planet and the people and life itself. And so, as I try to inspire you to join the Move to Amend movement, I want to be very candid. I recognize that I don't have to convince you or to persuade you that there are problems, right? I do recognize that I have to persuade you that we have a plan to win and that it's winnable. And then, even deeper, if I'm really doing my job, then I can persuade you to go out and persuade other people and a movement grows. And since I want to be persuasive, I want to share with you something that I learned intuitively as a trial lawyer, and now scientists are proving. It's this. If you want to be persuasive, facts don't matter so much. Listen, y'all, the first time I heard that said that way, my head almost exploded. Because like many of you, I've invested a lot of time and energy in facts. And I think that we kind of believe that, well, if I could just learn to present facts logically and cogently, everybody will see what I see, and then change will happen. But then I had the good fortune to come across the work of a cognitive scientist named George Lakoff. Oh, I see some of you know this name. And I've had the privilege to meet him. George Lakoff, as a cognitive scientist, has studied the human brain, the structure of it, and more importantly, how we process information. And what he has come to know and share with others is the human brain is not a supercomputer just running algorithms. Lakoff says human beings process information. In fact, human beings understand the world through the stories we tell each other. And the stories that are told over and over again become the narrative or the cultural story or the frame of how we see the world. And if you want to be persuasive, then you need to understand that. And since I do want to be persuasive, and since I know human beings process information through stories, I'm going to tell a story. I'm going to tell a story on how it came to be that these large transnational corporations are not just exercising power. I'm going to tell a story on how it came to be that large transnational corporations are ruling us. As surely as masters once ruled slaves, as surely as kings once ruled subjects, unelected and unaccountable corporate CEOs are ruling over us because they're making the decisions. Corporate CEOs already decided what your transportation choices were going to be to get here tonight. Corporate CEOs are deciding how much poison will be in the water that we're all drinking or the air that we're all breathing. Corporate CEOs are deciding whether you'll get health care or not, never mind whether you need it. Corporate CEOs decided whether to take this country into war. And we, the people, we get to choose between Coke or Pepsi. We can choose between paper or plastic at the grocery store. We can have 17 different types of toothpaste to choose from. You think I'm joking? Next time you go to a department store, go down that aisle. Count. Think of me when you do it. See, don't you get 17 or more. The point I'm making is we are presented with a plethora of consumer choices, provided you can pay. Now, that's also kind of important in this society. It doesn't matter what your needs are. It only matters if you can afford to pay for it, and that's kind of important. But even deeper than just whether you can pay for something, I want to lift this up. Consumer choice is all well and good, but do not mistake a consumer choice with political power. See, political power would be the opportunity to participate in a meaningful way in decisions that affect your life. Political power is the ability to actually help to shape how our social institutions operate. And saying it that way, I don't think we have very many opportunities to actually exercise political power on an ongoing way. We have to create them. Now, I want to be clear, voting is something that I do, I hope you do. I encourage people to exercise the franchise. And as we talk about the history of this country, you'll see how important the franchise has been. And voting matters. It matters a great deal. But let's just be honest, folks. If you want systemic change and all you do is go and pull a lever every 2 to 4 years, you're wasting your time. Right? If that's all you do. But there's a corollary. If you have the opportunity to go and pull a lever for somebody who's championing the systemic change that you want and you don't take advantage of it, you're wasting an opportunity, right? So it's not either or, it's both and. Yes, we got to vote, we got to think about voting, but we also got to think about what it means to build a broad-based social movement to educate a mass group of Americans to actually come together to make systemic change. That's the sweet spot. And since I'm going to tell a story, I want to be transparent. As I tell this story, I'm going to challenge you to challenge me. As you listen to this story, ask yourself, is this a story that only political progressives can hear and appreciate? Or has David Cobb and the Move to Amend coalition learned to tell a story that can cut across political party lines? Is this a political story that we have learned to tell that cuts across ideology? Is this a story that actually cuts across any of that stuff and actually gets not just to Americans but to human beings, right? That can actually lift up those things that we really want and care about. So I want you, as I tell this story, to be thinking about that And as I tell this story, I'm going to make sure that we cover 4 topics. The first topic that we're going to cover is the word democracy. That word gets tossed around a lot, so to make sure we've got some common ground, let me ask, from what language does this word derive?
Greek.
Greek, very good. Let's break it down. Demos means?
People.
The people. Kratia means? Rule. That's exactly right. Literally, translated from Attic Greek, the word democracy means the people rule. Pop quiz. How many of y'all believe we the people are ruling in the United States? Don't be shy. Look around. I'm not joking. Quick, just look around. Not a single hand in the air in this crowd. I do this presentation all across this country. Last year, I did it over 150 times. This year, I'm on track to do it even more than that. Sometimes, well, thank you. Sometimes I do an afternoon presentation and an evening presentation. I ask this question everywhere I go. Almost nobody raises their hands. That's a problem. But saying it another way, I think it's a good thing. What? It's a trick question or a trick statement. It's not a good thing that we the people don't rule. It's a good thing that people aren't raising their hands to that question anymore. I submit to you it's a good thing that people are coming to terms with a scary, truly frightening reality, but we know it's true, notwithstanding the creation myth of this country, notwithstanding what we were taught as children, we don't live in a functioning democracy in the United States of America. Right? And in fact, if we're going to stay with the Attic Greek language, let's just acknowledge not only is this not a democracy, it's actually a plutocracy. The rule by a small, wealthy elite.
Right.
I got this idea we should make up another word. Let's call it kleptocracy. The rule by a thieving, small, wealthy elite. Because that's what's going on. And the thing is, I know it, you know it, and people outside of this beautiful facility know it too. Ordinary Americans know it. They know it by their lived experience. They know that that's true. It's time for us to start telling the truth. And that'll bring me to the next topic, which is sovereignty. Friends, if I just had the word the sovereign on the board, who or what would you think of? Quick, the sovereign. King. I bet everybody here thought king. That's because the word sovereignty literally means the authority to rule. And friends, 500 years ago, the king was the sovereign. The sovereign was the king. Those words were synonymous. And where, by the way, did the king claim his authority to rule? God. You don't get more legitimate. That's a big deal. To illustrate what I mean by this, we're going to do a quick exercise together. This exercise is always a lot of fun. For me. You'll see, I will invite those assembled who are willing to do it to close your eyes and repeat after me. David Cobb is the king. I told y'all this was fun for me. I didn't get very many of you. I'll try another one. Because David is God's representative on earth.
Praise David.
So how about this last one? So therefore, anything David says, I will obey without question. Okay. All right, before I get a ride on my hands, now is where I would normally say open your eyes. But to your credit, Santa Cruz, nobody's eyes are closed. Good on you. But I will observe that y'all did what everybody does. As soon as you realized what I was asking you to say, you all laughed at me. Did you notice? There was sort of this collective laugh. And look, the reason you laughed is because it's funny. And not funny as in, oh, David has just made a very witty and droll comment. No, it wasn't that sophisticated. You ask any comedian, somebody who studies the comic arts, she or he will say, that's a cheap laugh. You know why? Because it's absurd humor. I set you up and made you say something absurd, so of course you laughed at it. The idea that I can tell Craig how to live his life because who my daddy is? That's ridiculous. Even better that I get to tell all of you how to live your life. Actually, I get to say how all of society is going to be organized because of the divine right of kings, and I'm the king, and therefore, of course you laugh at that. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's preposterous. And 500 years ago, Craig, people just like you and me and everybody in this room not only said it, but we believed it. Friends, I'm asking you to take a moment and contemplate that because this is a big deal. The question of sovereignty Not just who has the authority to rule, but deeper, what is the mechanism, the protocol for legitimately making and implementing decisions? This is what's called a first principle. It's one of the first things that any group of human beings have to answer for themselves. And you know, in the introductory remarks, it's true, Harvey said I was a Green Party member, and I'm proud of that. But I'm equally proud to say I frequently work in coalition with Democrats, and I got a long history of proving that. Deeper still, I've got a history of working in coalition with Republicans and Libertarians. In fact, when it came to fights against the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act and fights against our civil liberties, it was frequently Libertarians and Republicans that I was working most closely with in coalition. I've worked in coalition with socialists and anarchists. See, I have a long history of working in coalition with folks who I may not agree with on everything, but if I can find enough common ground, I'll work with them. And I say that not so you'll pat me on the head. I say it so you'll appreciate what I mean when I say, in my 20 years of social change work, looking for active coalition partners, I've never had the privilege or the opportunity to work in coalition with a monarchist. I can't find one. And 500 years ago, that's all there were. And 500 years is the blink of an eye in human history. See, folks, I'm saying this so you'll appreciate what I mean when I say that 500 years, nothing in the grand arc of things. And when people tell me and other Move to Amend organizers, oh, you can't amend the Constitution, we can't do that, that's too hard. We'll never do that. I think, have you not been paying attention? I mean, throughout all of world history, specifically throughout U.S. history, profound changes have been made. And I don't mean just changes in one administration or another. I don't mean just changes in one law or another. I mean changes in institutions. I mean changes in power relationships. I mean culture has shifted and changed. And now, my friends, the Texan gonna get metaphysical on y'all. I always warn, especially Californians first, because it's disjointing for Californians to hear a Texan get metaphysical. But here it comes. Now y'all are steel and ready. We are all individually participating in creating our shared collective reality. Right? Another way to say that is, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, it is true. Right? So if it is true that we are destroying the planet that we depend upon for life itself, and that is true, and if it is true that we're creating a racist, sexist, class-oppressive world order with the plunder of Earth, and that is true, then I suggest we ought to start thinking and acting differently. Maybe we ought to start thinking and acting like we're in a crisis. Do you know why I think we ought to start thinking and acting like we're in a crisis? Because we're in a crisis! Right? We are! And we need to say that out loud. It's a global ecological crisis. It's an economic crisis. It's a social justice crisis. In fact, it's a series of crises that are cascading down around our ears as we speak. And I say that not to freak you out, but I say it because it's true and you know it, and it will be empowering, actually, to tell the truth so that we can deal with it. And I also want to remind you that in the Chinese language, where they use symbols for words, the symbol for the word crisis is also the symbol for another word. Opportunity. See, friends, I think that we are blessed and cursed to be human beings at this moment in world history.
May you live in interesting times.
That is in fact, may you live in interesting times is a Chinese curse. The point I'm making, my friends, is this. Look, this crisis, I think, one way to describe it is simply imperial collapse. The empire is collapsing, right? And so I want to say something that I believe to be true. I believe that any study of world history shows us, in fact, it makes me happy to say it out loud. All empires fall. This one will too. But there's a problem here, because every other empire that was engaged in imperial overshoot, where they were sucking up the resources from the surrounding area, when those empires fell, the survivors, the human survivors of that empire collapse, they would just fade into the savannah or the forest or the jungle or whatever it was, right? And then that brings us to this observation. This empire is a global empire. And it's not a nation-state empire based on any national values. It's a global corporate empire intent upon commodifying and destroying the entire natural world. See, our challenge, our duty, not only to ourselves and our children, but to all living things at this moment in world history, is to be willing to confront our task, to learn to dismantle empire intentionally and deliberately, and recreate new institutions that are actually based on love and compassion and sharing. Yes. Right? That's our challenge. And by the way, since love and compassion and sharing, since these are such core human values, I have to ask, I just wonder out loud, why don't we hear those things talked about in politics? Why don't we hear people who are seeking our votes talk about how can they best implement a loving, compassionate society? Just tossing that out there. But here's the thing, my friends. As we go about our work, I also want to get back to this story and bring it to the next topic, which is legal personhood. Please note that I did not write corporate personhood on the board. That's because the concept of legal personhood literally means the ability to assert rights. And saying it that way, since it's legal personhood, I hope you can see we mean the ability to assert rights under law. And saying it this way, isn't it obvious? This is not a legal technicality that only lawyers should concern themselves with. The question of who has the legal right to assert under law and politics, this has been at the core of every social movement in this country. At the end of the day, when I talked about the franchise and voting really mattering, that's part of what I mean by this. The ability to assert rights under the legal system is a core part of any social movement that actually deserves to be called a movement. And the last topic on the board is the word corporation. Friends, from what language does the word corporation derive? It's Latin. Corpus means body, and the suffix tion means to have or create. And so translated, the word corporation from Latin, to have or create body. And by body, I mean physical body. And in law school, by the way, are there any lawyers in the crowd besides me? He'll admit it. And I got another one. So my two brothers at the bar, I will ask you, do you remember this being taught in law school, that a corporation is a legal fiction?
Yeah.
Of course, right? I have done this. No lawyer, when I ask that question, it's like that's a given, right? We know that. Watch this. Even for those of you who were not subjected to 3 years of law school to pervert your thinking, if you've heard the phrase that a corporation is a legal fiction, even if you couldn't precisely define it, but if you've heard that, raise your hand. See, all these hands go up, right? Corporation, legal fiction, corporation, legal fiction, corporation, all these hands that know that a corporation is a legal fiction. Friends, that begs the question. What does the word fiction mean? Made up, not true. Here's the thing. In law school, day one of corporations class, I remember my professor standing up and saying, you have to understand a corporation does not exist in the physical material world. You know, reality. The professor says the corporation doesn't exist in the physical material world, but understand, we're going to pretend like this group of people and the material and the resources that has been assembled and the contractual obligations that they make and the cultural assumptions associated with it, a very rich, complex concept. We're going to pretend like this abstract notion is a physical thing. In fact, that it's one thing so that we can treat it a certain way under law. And remember, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, poof! We create a corporation as a construct, collectively as a society, and the legal system does it as well. And the word corporation comes from Latin because the first corporations ever created, as we would understand them, were actually created during the Roman Republic. Not, by the way, during the Roman Empire. And sometimes I wish we would spend a little more time asking, what happens when a republic devolves into an empire? That might be an important conversation. Maybe we'll do that during the discussion. But The point I'm making is the word corporation also comes from Latin because they created them. And they created them as constructs for a reason. For example, who here has heard, or better yet, said out loud the phrase, all roads lead to Rome? Yeah, right? It's 2,000 years later, we still say that, right? Check it out. That road system was built and operated as a corporation. Likewise, the aqueduct system, that amazing bit of engineering that moved water all across the Italian peninsula without electricity. Quick parenthetical, one of the many reasons that I continue to have such confidence, faith, and optimism is because I know how clever human beings are. In fact, you can't name a problem that I don't reckon that I can't give you the solution to if you give me 30 minutes and access to the internet. Right? I'm not saying I have the answers to all of those. What I'm saying is that there are solutions, but they're not being implemented because we don't have political power. Right? There are solutions to everything. You can talk about that. Do you really want to stop the discussion to do that?
No. I just think nuclear waste doesn't have a solution.
Well, yes, it does. Stop creating it.
Well,
Actually, so look how easy that was. Again, if we had the political power, we could actually stop it. So the point is that the aqueduct system, it was conceived, designed, and operated as a corporation. Likewise, the first universities, the first hospitals, can you guess? Corporation. Pop quiz, what does a road system, a water system, a university, a hospital, what do they all have in common? Everything is for the common good. Everything is for the public that I just described. The genius of the corporation in its original conception was to create a mechanism to allow private money and individuals to come together to put it to public use. But unlike taxes, which are mandatory use of private money for public use, the corporation was voluntary. Friends, at the very core, this is the concept of the original creation and notion of a corporation, to create a voluntary mechanism by which human beings could assemble resources, material, and so forth, and put it to a public good. Saying it that way, I hope it's obvious, David Cobb and the Move to Amend Coalition are not anti-corporation. Corporations have been put to perfectly good, reasonable uses, right? In fact, I think making money can be a completely reasonable use by which you put a corporation, right? The problem is not with the corporation, because honestly, the corporation is just an instrument. It's a tool. And so, Craig, a quick little exercise. Imagine for a moment, if you will, that I'm building a house for you, and I'm a fair worker, a fair laborer, and I want a fair wage for my work, but I do a good product. I'm building your house with a hammer. Is that hammer good or bad? Well, it's good, right? I'm putting it to good use. Craig's happy with the work product. Now, Craig, same scenario. I have a hammer in hand, but now I'm rushing at you to bash your skull in. Hammer, good or bad? It's a trick question. The hammer is neither good nor bad. The hammer is a tool. In the first circumstance, you have good David Cobb, productive David Cobb doing a fair wage for a fair day's work, right? Good David Cobb appropriately using the tool. Second phenomenon, bad David Cobb. Apparently homicidal David Cobb. Right? The tool is neither good nor bad, but it is the purpose to which the tool is being put. I challenge you and put it to you this way. Our problem today is not the existence of the concept of a corporation. The problem is to what end we are putting these powerful tools. What is the legal system? What is the political system? What is the economic system that surrounds it? But I also have to point something else out, my friends. This is not exactly how the modern transnational corporation operates, is it? That's because the modern corporation actually, in its genesis, where it came from, the modern corporation as we understand it was created during the 14th and 15th century of Europe. You know, the age of discovery. Yeah. I have to put discovery in my little imaginary quotation marks because after all, what did the Europeans discover in the 14th and 15th century? Well, actually, Africa, Asia, later North and South America. Newsflash. There were people living there. They weren't lost. They weren't discovered. And so in the same interest of honest truth-telling, courageous truth-telling, let's tell the truth. The 14th and 15th century of Europe wasn't the age of discovery at all. It was the age of rape and pillage and plunder and murder. There's one word that sums that up for me. That's empire. See, that's what imperialism is, actually. It's beating people down. It's killing them. It's stealing from them. And what gets me, and this is really important, the modern transnational corporation didn't just accidentally get created during the age of empire, or European empire. It was created as an intentional, deliberate instrument of empire. In fact, they were called joint stock companies when they were first created. In fact, one of the most early and famous of those joint stock companies was the East India Company. Oh, I see you've heard of it. The East India Company, literally designed to militarily conquer the entire subcontinent of India. And not only to conquer those people militarily in their bodies, but to conquer and colonize their minds, to destroy their existing civilization, and to force new institutions upon them so that those people would then work and labor to steal the resources from their own land so that that wealth could be sent to the shareholders of the East India Company as profit. It was a business model based on imperialism. That's also, by the way, not unlike how the Africa Trading Company worked. The Africa Trading Company, another famous or infamous joint stock company. Anybody want to guess what the Africa Trading Company traded?
Slavery.
Folks, I'm going to use myself as an example because I don't think that we have honest conversation about race and whiteness in this country. And honestly, I don't think white people initiate conversations about race or whiteness often enough in this country. So I'm going to do that, putting myself on the hook, because I'm going to tell you something that I am not necessarily proud of. And that is this. If I were asked that question, what did the Africa Trading Company trade? And I was being casual, not stupid, but I wasn't really being really intentional and really being thinking and deconstructing the racist, sexist, class oppressive world order in which I've been grown up in this society. So if I were just asked that question, the word that would pop into my mind, slaves. Of course it would. After all, I've been educated in this country. I was taught about the Africa slave trade. I was taught about how wonderful it was that Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth were runaway slaves who helped other slaves run away. By the way, nowadays, I would suggest this to you too. I'll just give you a suggestion. Anytime the concept of slavery or runaway slaves comes up, translate that word immediately in your head and say out loud, I'm sorry, they weren't runaway slaves. They were self-liberated human beings. See the difference? Right? And all I'm saying is, and this is the thing, I'm not proud that the word slave pops into my head, but I'm being honest, it does. I'm also not ashamed because I'm a product of this culture. I'm trying to get over it, right? I'm trying to deal with it. And now that I've made such a big deal about the word slave, I want to ask you, in the 14th and 15th century when the Africa Trading Company was in existence, was Africa populated by slaves? No. Of course not. Africa was populated by people. Africa was populated by people, and now I will say with trepidation, but with conviction, Africa was populated by people who were basically just like me. And I say that with trepidation because I know what pigment I have. I'm not stupid. But I say it with conviction because you ask any scientist, you ask any biologist, and she or he will tell you race doesn't exist. I mean, sure, pigment exists, but so does eye color and hair. For those of you who have hair color exists. You know, facial feature, there are physical differences, right? But no scientist would ever elevate that to a classification or a taxonomy. So race does not exist, objectively true, but racism damn sure does. What? How can that be? Oh yes, if enough people think that something is true, if enough people act like it's true, race is a construct as surely as a corporation is a construct. It's created culturally and by society. And now, the point I'm making is we need to understand that what links imperialism, corporatism, and racism, exploitation and oppression. At the end of the day, those are the things that are underlying. And if we're going to really be serious, then we have to learn to both identify, name, challenge, dismantle, institutions that are based on exploitation and oppression and recreate new systems based on love, compassion, and sharing. It's just both that simple and that hard. That's actually, I think, where the real work comes. And I also want to say this, not just about the construct of race, but the concept of whiteness itself. Guess what country invented whiteness?
What?
This country. Whiteness. To be white. For example, thanks to my mama, I know that I descend from Scots and Irish. Two peoples both conquered by the British Empire. There's a special place in hell for the British Empire in my world. But I want to ask this question. Anybody else know for a fact that you descend from Irish heritage? A lot of hands always go up. Congratulations, everybody. You're recently white. In world history. Who here knows the book, How the Irish Became White? No? You know what I'm talking about? It is an amazing book. So here's the thing. We don't have time to go into it now, but if you really want to begin to deconstruct the concept of whiteness and why it was created, that book is an amazing, you agree? It's an amazing way to help you understand it. So now I'm going to give a quick, like a 3-sentence version of it. It goes like this. So if you have pigment like I do, but you're poor or working class, you understand that the boss's boot is on your neck. Man, I hate this. I'm being systematically exploited and oppressed. My labor's being stolen. I hate this. This is terrible. Hey, at least I'm white.
Oh my God.
Whiteness gets created in order to bamboozle people who look like me, to prevent me from actually seeing how the social, political, and economic systems are actually operating. How the Irish became white lays that out in incredible detail. So, my friends, remember, I'm telling a story, right? So I want to make this story now a particularly American story by transitioning this history lesson, fast forward it to this. How many colonies in the founding of the United States of America? 13. Everybody knows that, so that was easy. So here's the really hard question. Of those 13 colonies, how many of them were corporations? It's a trick question. The answer, all of them. All of them in this sense. If we understand that the word corporation means to have or create body, I will tell you that it took the king to create them, to give them body. The king created Massachusetts. Now, somebody in the crowd might still be thinking, that's ridiculous. Massachusetts was already here. The king didn't just poof create it. But that's why it's a trick question. See, the land was clearly already here. The people who lived on that land. The forest and the deer that lived in the forest and the rivers and the streams and the fish that lived there. You know, reality, it was already here. But it took the king to create Massachusetts out of that reality. And the king created Massachusetts by the use of a very particular legal instrument. Anybody know the name of the legal instrument the king used to create Massachusetts?
Charter.
A charter. Nicely done. Now, to illustrate how it is that the king creates Massachusetts by a charter, we'll do another exercise. In this exercise, I'll be the king. Hey, why do y'all think I get to be the king in this exercise? Answer, because I'm telling the story. See how important stories are? See how important it is that we learn to ask who's telling these stories? Because I'll tell you something, in our culture, friends, the cultural story is actually infrequently being told either on Fox News or CNBC. And at a very real way, I would submit this to you. If you want the same basic cultural story, but a right-wing version of it or a conservative version of it, then you tune into Fox News for news. If you want that same cultural story, but you want kind of a liberal or left-leaning view of that, tune into CNBC. But the real culture is being disseminated through those 30-second ads, right? And what's really interesting, and in lots of other ways, and what's really interesting to me is basically, as far as I can tell, all those 30-second ads really are all designed to convince you that in order to feel like a complete human being connected to other people for whom you will have status and respect, you got to buy a bunch of crap. That's actually the cultural story that's being told over and over again, is to consume, consume, consume. And that somehow if we just consume the right thing or enough of it, we'll find happiness, which of course we know to be a lie. And not only is it not making us happy, it's destroying the planet in the process. We got to get a handle on this, folks. I want to get back to this though, because I'm going to be the king. And as the king, with nothing more than a writing instrument and something to write on, I will create Massachusetts. But of course, friends, I'm the king, so I'm not going to go about the business of actually having to administer Massachusetts. I'm the king. I've got other people to exploit. So instead, I'm going to create a new legal title called a royal governor. And it goes like this. And now, my friends, I'm going to quote from the actual charter that created Massachusetts. I, the king, create Massachusetts. Create a legal position known as the royal governor. Assign the royal governor with the legal responsibility, quote, again, this is from the actual charter that created Massachusetts, quote, the royal governor has the responsibility to plant, to rule, and to govern this new area on behalf of me, the king, to benefit me, the king, but also to benefit the other shareholders of the joint stock company known as the Massachusetts Bay Trading Company. See, Massachusetts actually began as a for-profit imperialist business model the same way the East India Company did. Right? It was originally the Rhode Island and Providence Plantation. It wasn't the Virginia Commonwealth in its original conception. It was the Virginia Company. Georgia was a penal corporation. Anybody want to guess what skin color the original slaves had? White. They were white. See what I mean about this being something that's worth investigating? But friends, in modern times, the administrator, we would not call the administrator here the royal governor. What word would we use instead? How about this one? The chief executive officer. Another way to say it is the American Revolution was not just a rejection of monarchy as a form of rule. It was a people's uprising against corporate rule. That's our birthright. That's our heritage. We come from revolutionary stock. That's worth remembering. And friends, the American revolutionaries were not calling for a more socially responsible king. The American revolutionaries were not calling for a more socially responsible royal governor. Perhaps today we should do more than just call for more socially responsible corporate CEOs. Right? I don't know about you, but I'm sick and tired of being told, oh, you don't like all this asthma happening in these poor communities, almost always communities of color? Go and ask the CEO not to do it. Oh, Massey Coal Company, would you please not kill quite so many coal miners? Oh, British Petroleum Corporation, would you please not destroy the entire Gulf of Mexico? I mean, is that really all we want? A little less death? Can't we raise our aspirations higher? Actually, I'm going to go better. You know in your heart those aren't our aspirations. But we have been living in a society where the ruling elite have been systematically suppressing our aspirations. They are teaching us to ask for less than we want, right? That's what they're doing to us. Well, I want to remind you that when I say the American revolutionaries weren't calling for a more socially responsible king, that's true. But just 10 years before the revolution actually erupted, those people who would become revolutionaries, 10 years before, 1 decade, they were writing letters to the king that went like this. Oh, Father King, we, your humble children, come before you on bended knee to beg that you intervene on our behalf, because your royal governor is administering unfair business and trade rules. It wasn't just taxation without representation. It was unfair international trade rules. And they said, King, the English Parliament who are passing these laws, they're unfair because they're benefiting the East India Company Corporation or joint stock company and exploiting and oppressing us. And we're subjects of you, oh mighty king. Pop quiz. What percentage of the English Parliament passing these laws do you think owned shares in the East India Company? 100%. Sometimes I wish we'd spend a little more time investigating class perspective class motivations in this country. "Oh, Father King," they begged, "will you please intervene on our behalf?" It was the most sniveling, groveling language you can imagine. And I don't know about you, but I'm keenly interested in trying to understand what happened in that decade. What happened that they began to think differently and act differently? What happened to make them change the stories they were telling each other? What happened to convince them to stop the boot kissing and the groveling and to get up off their knees and to stand up straight, to stand up proud, look directly at the king, the king who claimed cultural authority from God, and behind the king to see the most powerful military the world had ever assembled and said, "You're all done, get out, we're going to do it different." Because let me tell you something, folks, that process is magic. And every time I tell this story, what pops into my head is Mr. Wei Lin. That was the Chinese businessman with nothing more than a briefcase stood before an entire column of tanks in Tiananmen Square. What an amazing, courageous act that was. But you know what? It wasn't magic. Because the magic that I'm talking about can only be invoked when one person stands up against injustice and oppression, and then somebody to her left stands up, and somebody to her right stands up, and you get this collective standing up together. That's when the magic starts to cackle, and at this point, I just got to say, may the goddess bless the Occupy movement. Right? Don't just twinkle clap. Right? The Occupy movement was and is magic, because they weren't just daring us, inviting us to occupy public space, as important as that was. They were inviting us, daring us, challenging us to occupy imagination space, to imagine that we could live and act differently. And you know what, friends? I think it's important to say, I said it was and is magic, because I'm so proud to tell you, I don't know, Move to Amend would never dare to speak for Occupy, but we have a long history of collaborating with Occupy. And I'm very proud to tell you that the Inter-Occupy has called for an Occupy national gathering this summer in the Midwest, Kalamazoo, Michigan. What? Kalamazoo, which, by the way, is the site of the largest land spill on land in the United States. I didn't even know that. Any of y'all know? A couple of you knew. See, I didn't even know that, and I'm a pretty educated person, so it's to lift that up, but also because it's the heartland. And Move to Amend has been invited to convene the entire Economic Justice Day on Saturday. And we're working with the Public Banking Institute, cooperatives, Strike Debt, a People's Investigation, the Prison Industrial Complex, to show the intersectionality around racial oppression, around economic injustice, and to show that any movement that's actually going to deal with that have got to actually deal with all of those things. And it's an honor for me to stand before you and say, Move to Amend is collaborating with Occupy National Gathering. And I want to say this too. I said was and is magic because I don't know what Occupy 2.0 is going to look like precisely in 2013, but I'm telling you this, it's gestating right now. Right now, and whatever emerges, Move to Amend is going to collaborate with it. And if you can get to Kalamazoo, Michigan in the summer, please go. If you can't go, use your Facebook page, your email, your Twitter accounts. Let people know, occupynationalgathering.org, because we need to start collaborating together. And the other thing that I want to be clear about, this notion of a charter, it's also another way to think about it is this, is that after the American Revolution was successful, a new charter gets written, but this charter is used to describe the entire framework for how our political and legal system is supposed to operate. What's that charter called? The U.S. Constitution. How many of y'all have actually read the U.S. Constitution? Oh, good. A bunch of hands, girls. Y'all grade my papers. See if I get this right, because I'll tell you, when you read the Constitution in its entirety, you'll see two actors at play. The first actor is the most important actor. In fact, it's so important it's the first three words.
Yeah, we the people.
Those are hallowed words in this country, and they should be. See, we the people come together to create the second actor, which is government itself. Saying it this way, we the people create government. Government is dependent upon us. The way some of my colleagues like to say it is, the people should never be afraid of the government. In fact, government
should be afraid of the people.
Should be afraid of the people. How many of y'all believe the government is afraid of we the people? Thank you for raising your hands. They are afraid of us. They are afraid of us. Let me tell you something. It doesn't make me happy to say this, but I've just lifted up Occupy. Let's just acknowledge the reason that Occupy 2.0 has to gestate is because the Obama administration worked in conjunction with Republican and Democratic Party governors across this country and with police departments across this country, mayors of both parties across this country, through the Office of Homeland Security, and devised a plan to systematically suppress, dismantle, and destroy the Occupy encampments. That is true, and all you have to do is investigate through the Freedom of Information Act. It's objectively true. Doesn't make me happy to say it, but I just point this out. The ruling elite and their minions at the leadership level of both parties. I know that principal liberals, principal Republicans did not agree with it. But at the uber echelon elite of both government and the military and corporate America, there was a definite agreement we've got to destroy Occupy. You know why? Because ordinary people were getting together and having political conversations about the first principles of how our society is operating, and they knew this isn't fair. This isn't right. Why is 1% ruling over 99%? See, I submit to you nonviolent revolutionary ethics, nonviolent revolutionary thinking was incubating in those Occupy encampments. The government is afraid of the people. They're afraid of us getting together in a nonviolent way. And I wish that sometime I could actually have an honest conversation with one of these ruling elites, because I'd like to say there's nothing to be afraid of. And I mean that. There's nothing. We're a peaceful people. But not only that, not only is this movement peaceful, you're going to like the world that we create. And honestly, your children or grandchildren are going to be grateful that we actually got you off that crack pipe of power that you're addicted to. And let's be honest, man, these folks, they've been on that crack pipe for a minute, right? They've been smoking power, and they're addicted to it, right? And it's going to take time to wean them off of it. But these folks, I wish that I could tell them, look, trust us. This movement is going to create a beautiful world. You're going to like it. And you know what? We're going to get you out into the world, into the nature. We're going to take you for walks. We're going to give you the help that you obviously need, because you're so addicted to power that you've forgotten what it is like to actually be in loving community with other human beings within a natural ecosystem. This is a good thing, right? And in the U.S. constitutional framework, we the people are understood and described to be free and sovereign. What does the word sovereign mean again? The authority to rule. We're in charge. The king isn't sovereign. We kicked his butt out. But listen, the government isn't sovereign either. Government is subordinate and accountable. Government is subordinate to whom? The people. Government is accountable to whom? The people. That's got a ring to it, doesn't it? I like how this is going. Let's continue. We the people are free and sovereign because we the people have rights. Government never has rights. Government only has duties. I'm going to stop for a moment to underscore the difference between rights and duties is profound. If I have the right to do something, it means I can do it. And I don't need anybody's permission. I don't need this group's permission. I don't need city council's permission. I don't need the California state legislature's permission. I don't need Congress's permission. Man, I'm from Texas. I don't need my mama's permission. Legally. Culturally, I might. In fact, I've heard some Californians know what we say in Texas. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. And I say that because I think it's worth pointing. I mean that. I care a great deal about what my mama thinks about me, because she raised me to understand the values, right? And I want her to be proud of me and to know that I'm living the values of peace and justice that she instilled in me. See, the point I'm making is, if our values in this country are really peace, justice, democracy, compassion, sharing, why don't we have legal and political systems that are facilitating those? Law and culture ought to actually be a lot closer than they are in this country. But this is the thing. Not only do I not need advance permission to exercise a right, but if government, local, state, or federal law infringes upon my rights, I can go to court and have that law overturned. Right, brother at the bar? Government cannot legitimately, doesn't matter what the political process is, they cannot legitimately violate my rights. You with me, lawyer? Hold on. We can do this during the thing. But here's the thing. If I have an inherent, inalienable right, then it means that I can do it. Government can't infringe upon my rights. Government never has rights over the people. Government only has duties to the people. And where do those duties come from? Well, remember, all power resides with the people. And this is a very important idea. The only government that is legitimate is the government that has the consent of the governed, and all governmental powers derive its powers from the people. Right? That's basic American civics. And that brings me to a pop quiz. What's the population, more or less, of Santa Cruz, California? How many? I'm going to say 50,000 people. So 50, it does, y'all, come on. Are you really going to get caught up on this? Let it go. 60. Wow.
200.
So, in the city of Santa Cruz, 60,000 people hold all the political power. So, I will celebrate that fact, but I'll tell you this. I don't want to go to a meeting of 60,000 people where we decide where should stop signs go. And I like political meetings. I'm not going to that one. Can you imagine? Now imagine your county all getting together and having a big collective general assembly to decide county business. See, the point I'm making is, in our system of government, we the people delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Do we delegate all our power to government? Hell no. We only delegate enough power for government to perform the duties that we the people have told them to do. And how does, oh, by the way, that concept that I've just described, that's what limited government means. Government is limited in its power to perform the duties that we the people have told them to do. And how does government perform their duties or discharge their legal duty? They write laws in the public interest. And I want to be clear, there's going to be debate on what those laws should be. And that's as it should be. There should be discourse and debate, and we should figure out processes to disagree. But you know what? I feel young to play the I remember when game, but I remember when you could have fierce debate, political disagreement, and still be agreeable to people. Mm-hmm. You know, I remember a time when my daddy and Mr. Barry, our neighbor, we didn't have a next door neighbor because I grew up in the country, right? But Mr. Barry and the Barrys were our adjacent landowners. And I remember watching Daddy and Mr. Barry get into a fussing match that I thought was going to erupt into a fist fight. They were both so angry and mad. And honestly, y'all, as a little kid, I was getting real scared. If you can imagine a young boy watching his daddy and another adult man like to the point of yelling at each other, and you think that they might going to start fighting. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I was like this, and then the next thing I know, they're laughing and joking, and Daddy says, "Barry, you coot, you crazy." No, they didn't shake hands like that, Craig. They shook hands like this. "Yeah, loon, I'll see you at the feed store, the game or whatever," right? And as a kid, I went, "What happened?" As an adult, I know what happened. Here's what I think happened. I don't remember what they were fighting about, but I'll tell you this. I think one of them recognized, acted upon, and the other acted upon it as well, this knowledge. We're neighbors. Your kids play with my kids. I watch your property when you're not around. You watch my property when I'm not around. During a hurricane, we depend on each other because I grew up on the seacoast of the Gulf Coast of Texas. See, they realized that they were in human relationship with one another. Now, as redneck men, they wouldn't have said it that way, but that's what it meant. They were in human relationship with one another, and it mattered to them more importantly than whatever their disagreement is. I'll tell you something, folks. I believe we should be passionate about our politics. Can you tell I'm passionate about my politics? But I will also be civil and respectful to people with whom I disagree. I think that we need to learn to be politically mature and sophisticated enough to have fierce political disagreement and still be agreeable. You don't have to agree with somebody to be agreeable, right? I think we've lost something in this country because of this binary, like D versus R thing that's been programmed into us, as if therefore I'm right, you're wrong, and there's no more complexity to the matter. This has been a problem. And whether I like it or not, laws that are written are the public laws. But remember, the one thing that no public law can ever do is to violate the private rights or the minority rights of anybody who lives there. And now, friends, since I've taken the time to frame this up, in 30 seconds, I'm going to give you a sentence. It's a run-on sentence, but it's 30-second long sentence to say how the U.S. government is supposed to operate. Time me, I know somebody will. In the U.S. Constitution, we the people are free and sovereign because we hold all the political power. But we the people delegate a certain amount of our power to government. Government which will be held subordinate and accountable to the people. And we will charge government with the duty to write laws at the local, state, and federal level to reflect the public interest. And those public laws are the law of the land, with this exception. No public law can ever violate the private rights of the free and sovereign people who live there. Ta-da! Isn't that brilliant? Isn't that beautiful? We should try that in this country. This would work. And I'm not even joking. This is brilliant. This is beautiful. And I'm also not joking. We've never tried it. Because before I go 1 second further waxing poetic about the Constitution, somebody tell me what year this Constitution gets ratified. Nicely done. 1789 is the ratification date. In 1789, the date this country is actually founded as the United States of America, now we know what legal personhood means, the ability to assert rights. Who was a legal person who could assert rights? What were their characteristics? White, male, landowners, of the right religion. Learn something here. So, my friends, I like how Howard Zinn said it. The entire history of the United States has been a series of struggles by actual human beings to be defined as persons with rights under our Constitution. See how important legal personhood matters? Right? And so now that we've laid this all out, it might behoove us very quickly to say, well, where should the most dominant institution on earth go? The most dominant institution in the United States, politically and culturally. I'm talking, of course, about the transnational corporation. So before I put the corporation on the board, I want to ask, what does it take to form a corporation in California today? You need some money. That's right. File some paperwork with the Secretary of State. A trivial amount of money. I think it's $99 in California.
200.
Maybe it's 200. It's pretty trivial. $200, and you know what the Secretary of State will do as long as you fill the form out? Rubber stamp it and issue you what? A charter. And that charter creates the corporation. How long can your corporation last in California? Forever. Well, in perpetuity is what lawyers like to charge, to say forever, so that we can justify charging you $300 an hour, what you should do for yourself. But what can you do with the corporate charter? Under California law, anything legally permissible. That's what the code says today. Apparently you can do illegal things if you have enough money and power. But the point is that we don't even think about that today, right? Most of us have not even been educated or we just assume that corporations and how they operate, this is just the way it is. I submit to you, if we were really a self-governing people, and if our educational system was really preparing ordinary people to be critical thinkers and actually sovereign citizens, we would actually know this. But now, friends, I'm going to take you back to 1789 and tell you what it once took to form a corporation. This was true not just in Massachusetts, but in every state of the Union. It was true for the next 75 to 100 years. First, your application didn't go just to some clerk. Your application went to the State House of Representatives, where they discussed it, debated it, and voted on it, and you had to get a majority vote. And that's not enough, because now your application, if you got that majority vote, goes to the State Senate, where they discuss it, debate it, and vote on it, and you got to get a majority vote. And that's still not good enough, because if you got those two majorities votes, now it goes to the governor, who considers it and has to be willing to sign it. Does that sound anything like a corporate charter today? Of course not. What did I just describe? A law. The legislative process. I just described how a bill becomes a law in this system. My friends, there was a time in this country that the privilege of limited liability was held to be so powerful, so important, so valuable, that it took a political act to actually allow it, because it was a privilege, not a right. And now, check this out. If you were granted the privilege of limited liability, you know how long that limited liability lasted? 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. The longest any corporate charter ever lasted was 20 years, at which point it automatically evaporated. Now, the business could continue, obviously, But the limited liability aspect that the chartering process bestowed, it evaporated. And if you wanted limited liability at the end of that period, you had to reapply all over again. Oh, and by the way, if you were granted limited liability, all you could do was the specific thing that you had asked for. And if you did any other type of business, what happened to the corporate charter? Revoked. Corporate charters were routinely revoked for ultra vires, meaning beyond the authority, meaning that you're doing business beyond the authority of this corporation that has limited liability, and that's a privilege. You're unfairly competing with other people who have businesses that are not having limited liability. It wasn't, right? I mean, it's a really important thing, limited liability. And now, watch this. Even if you were in the limited time period for which you had been granted your corporate charter, even if you were doing the specific thing that your corporate charter had been allowed to do, if you ever did anything to violate the public trust, do you know what happened to your corporate charter? Revoked. Corporate charters were routinely revoked for merely acting outside the public interest. Pop quiz. Name a single one of the Fortune 500 corporations that could even exist today. I'll wait. Answer, none. I mean, surely there are hundreds of thousands of corporations that could continue to operate. Again, I'm not anti-corporation, but I'm pointing out that these huge transnational corporations that are destroying the planet, those monstrosities wouldn't even be allowed to exist today if we had the same political... Can I finish this up and then I'll come to you? The same political restrictions that once existed in this country. Now, I'm not saying that 1789 was the land of milk and honey. Slavery existed. The patriarchy was real. But what I am saying is the tool known as a corporation was properly controlled under the political, legal, and cultural system. Right? That's really important. We can do this. It's happened before. And so now, my friends, thank you for your patience, because here comes the punchline. Now that we know that it takes an action of state government to create a corporate charter, we know that the corporate charter describes or holds the corporation subordinate and accountable. We know the charter describes the duties of what a corporation can do. We know corporations should only be allowed to operate in the public interest. Isn't it just obvious that a corporation should be here the way the founders intended? That is, for anybody who cares about the founders' original intent. Think about it. The founders understood that. And think about it. When an unelected and unaccountable Supreme Court comes waltzing in and tells the rest of us, oh no, now you have to treat a corporation as if it's a person with rights, it perverts the whole framework. See, corporate personhood is just a shorthand for the legal concept that says a corporation can claim the inherent and inalienable constitutional rights of a human being. And friends, that's not just illogical, that's not just stupid, that steals our sacred right to self-government. And what pisses me off as a lawyer, they use the legal system to legalize the theft of our sacred right to self-government. Right? And as I come to the end of this story, I want to remind you, I asked you to challenge me, to challenge yourself. Is this a story that only liberals and progressives could hear? And to answer it, I'll tell you this. I've done this presentation to occupies, and I've gotten laughs, and I've gotten applause. And I've also given this presentation before Tea Party groups. And I got laughs, and I got applause. Now, I will admit the laughs and applause comes at different places. But it does come. Limited government, sovereignty, none of you cheered that. I mean, nobody booed it either, right? But I do want to point out that there is a way to tell this story that is honest, that has authenticity, that has integrity. If we learn to speak a language that actually makes sense, I'm not saying just lie to folks. I'm not saying buzzwords. I'm saying get authentic about it, because the point is the Move to Amend campaign is not an issue. It's about the value of whether or not we have a democratic Republican form of government or not. That's the reason Democrats, Republicans, Greens, Libertarians, Moderates, Independents are joining Move to Amend, and I'm inviting you to join too. Is there anybody here who's not already part of the Move to Amend coalition? Do we have some folks that are not yet? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to actually pass this around, and I'm going to leave the copy with my colleagues here in Santa Cruz. But this petition, friends, is not a petition that we submit on bended knee to anyone. This is an organizing petition. We're going to be in touch with you. So what I'm going to do is start this one at the front and put a pin with it. Hold on. Now, if you're already part of this movement, we already got you. But if I could, Chris, could I ask you to take this to the back? Let's make sure everybody gets a chance to join this movement. And I'm going to end this before we open it up for discussion. Move to Amend did not even exist before 2010. That's how new we are. 2010. I just want to give you these numbers because it'll give you a sense of what's going on. 2010. Today, we have 270,000 people and growing. We've helped 500 communities pass resolutions at the city or county level. We've put it on the ballot in 25 jurisdictions, that is, using the citizens' initiative process, allowing citizens to weigh in and vote on whether they believe that the Constitution should be amended. Actually, I'm sorry, 2 more, because we just had 2 more in a very moderate Fort Atkinson and Whitewater, Wisconsin. So 27 times have we put it before, from Wisconsin? 27 times we put it on the ballot. Guess how many times we've won? 27. We haven't lost a single one. That includes in Republican-dominated areas, Democratic-dominated areas, places considered liberal, places considered conservative, places considered moderate. We found a way to talk about this that cuts across those party labels, and it's working. And the thing is, my friends, we have thousands upon thousands of endorsing organizations. Everybody in this room is a member of some organization. Maybe it's the Kiwanis Club. Maybe it's the Seroptimus. Maybe it's a community association. Maybe it's a Peace and Justice Center. It doesn't matter what it is. I'm going to ask you if you will take up this challenge to go to that group, whatever it is, and get them to endorse Move to Amend. And the reason I'm asking you to do it is not just to add another name to our list, although we like that. It forces you to explain it. It forces you to get good enough to talk about what Move to Amend is, why we're calling to abolish all corporate constitutional rights, and abolish the idea that money is speech. See what I'm getting at? It forces you to educate a whole new group of people, and it allows you to get better at it, and they get educated. That's how the movement goes. And so at this point, I want to thank very much the Santa Cruz Move to Amend. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.